Oh my. This is a time that we really want to cultivate 2020 spiritual vision, isn't it? Certainly it's always been a good time to cultivate that, but it's not an easy thing to do. And it seems like the time that we live in, whatever time it is that any generation lives in, we feel it acutely that we need that transformation, we need that change. So this year, our Centers for Spiritual Living are devoted to 2020 spiritual vision. And we are cultivating that through bringing forward various ideas and areas for us to explore and deepen in and grow in. And this month, being Black History Month, I am talking about some of the leaders that I'm talking about are people that you've heard of or you know well. At the end of the month, I'm going to be talking about somebody you don't know quite as well. Not these two, but these two are also people that we don't know enough about. We don't hear about a lot of African American history and heroes and heroines. Robert Smalls was a slave who took over a Confederate slave ship and freed the slaves on it and sailed it, and actually was the motivation for Abraham Lincoln bringing freed slaves into service. And he went into politics and became a politician in South Carolina that created the first free, compulsory public school program for the United States in South Carolina. And then, Bessie Coleman got fascinated with flight. They wouldn't take her in flight schools in the United States, so she was told by somebody to go to France, which she did. And there weren't a lot of things that pilots did then other than being stunt pilots, and so that's what she did. And she actually died in an accident as a stunt pilot, but she was going to start a school for pilots for African American people who were interested in learning how to fly. So she was really quite a groundbreaker in her time. She was the first female pilot, I think, and the first African American pilot. So that's Bessie Coleman. Now, at the same time that we have Black History Month, with all of the depth and richness and, upheaval in the feelings around what's gone on in that, it's also Valentine's Day coming up, which seems like an odd juxtaposition, but we can hold two things at once. And so this story is about relationships, because today we are going to be doing things about relationships as well. In mythology, humans originally had 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 faces. Fearing them, Zeus split them in 2, forcing an eternal search for their other half. Zeus failed. And this lady says, when my now husband arrived at my house for our first date, I opened the door to my other half, dressed exactly like me. Head to toe, aviator Ray-Bans, Levi's, Timberland boots, the same yellow ski jacket. After our amazed laughter, he said, one of us has to change. I changed my clothes, but not my mind. I knew we'd be together forever. I love that story because it's the recognition that upon opening the door, it dawned on both of them that they were looking at somebody who definitely had something in common with them. That's not always as obvious to us in the world. And so we're going to be looking today at courage, liberty, freedom. And when we look at that in the context of love, as we get ready to, after the talk is over, you guys won't see it online, sorry, but we're going to do a vows renewal, and then we're going to do a little something for people who are wanting to welcome love into their lives, and also something for people who have lost a loved one. So, but I'm going to begin with a woman called Moses. Harriet Tubman has kind of been a heroine in my mind for a long time. Now that the movie is out, people are getting to learn a little bit more about her. And what people don't know necessarily is that our founder, our organizational founder, Ernest Holmes, was very ahead of his time in his not only his study of freedom and liberty and what that means to us in terms of what we can create in our own lives when we let go of the self-imposed limitations, but also in recognition of people and individuals. As he was doing his early work in the 1920s, he began teaching and training practitioners and ministers who were women as well as men, who were people in minority groups, people of color, which was not being done much anywhere, and the LGBTQ community. They were all alike to him, and in fact, I mean alike as human beings with value. In fact, I heard from a minister who is my colleague that he had heard a story about Ernest Holmes saying that one of our ministers, who I did know when he was a young minister, an African-American man, at a convention or a gathering, some of the white ministers were upset because he was using the same bathrooms and the same water fountains and everything as they were. And this friend of mine said, as he heard the story, Ernest really cleaned their clock. He basically let him know that that had nothing to do with what he was teaching, that they were not in principle. So I want to share with you a little bit about overlaps in some of the things that they said and held as important. So first, a little bit of context. So Harriet was on a plantation in Maryland. She was married to a free man, but she was a slave. And two of her sisters had already been sold off by this family. Her mother was there at that plantation. And she discovered that she was going to be sold after the master died. They needed money. She was going to be sold down further south, and she determined that it was time for her to escape. And so when she actually finally left, she left Poplar Neck in Caroline County, Maryland, in September of 1849, and using the North Star and the rivers as her guides, she made her way, along with the help of the Underground Railroad, to Pennsylvania, and then went on to Philadelphia, which is about 90 to 100 miles, partly on foot, partly in the backs of carts, all along this way alone. So this is something that Ernest Holmes said that struck me because of the North Star, because Harriet did not read. Holmes said, having recognized the divine presence as your guiding star of hope, assurance, and certainty, be equally sure that you recognize the universal law of mind as your servant. This law is the principle you are to use. Your faith in this law causes it to act upon that faith, to bring into your experience those things that you accept. Harriet had a profound faith in God, and she also was absolutely committed to her freedom, without question, without pause. She said, I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other. For no man should take me alive. I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted, and when the time came for me to go, the Lord would let them take me. So one of the things that we see in the film is her faith and the deep commitment that she had to her own liberation. This is the poster from the movie, Be Free or Die. And she did carry a gun, and she did dress in disguises, including as a man. She was very daring, the places that she went into. She went back to Maryland, where they were looking for her over and over again. She made, I think, 13 trips back. And in those trips, as an Underground Railroad conductor, she freed 70 people, those who were willing to go with her. This is the map of her journey. So this is about 100 miles to Philadelphia. And she had visions, Harriet. Now, Now, I don't know how this happened to Joan of Arc, but with Harriet, her experience with visions happened after a head injury that she received as a child. She was in a store, and an enraged overseer picked up and threw a 2-pound iron weight at a slave that was trying to escape, and he missed the slave, and he hit her in the head. It cracked her skull open, and it led to a lifelong battle with headaches and seizures and narcolepsy, which, believe me, is dangerous if you're trying to get someplace, and visions. And the visions let her know when to wait, when to hide, when to go forward, where to go, and she followed them without question. She, after she managed to escape, she was involved in freeing around 70 other slaves during the 10 years she was with the Underground Railroad. She made approximately 13 trips back to the South, to Maryland, guiding slaves to their freedom. And the slaveholders in the eastern shore of Maryland who were looking for her, because there was a bounty on her head, they had no idea that it was Harriet Tubman, or Minty Ross, as they knew her. Araminta was her name. They didn't know it was Harriet who was helping and inspiring people to run away. They thought it was a man, because the plantation people called her Moses, because she led her people out of slavery into freedom. Also, during the Civil War, she had a number of different roles, including working as a nurse, a scout, a spy, and a cook for the Union Army. So as a nurse, she took care of wounded soldiers and also freed slaves. And eventually, she was a scout behind Confederate lines and a spy. She is credited as being the first woman to lead an Army raid into enemy territory. In June 1863, she led Colonel James Montgomery and his 2nd South Carolina Black Regiment up the Combahee River and overtook the Confederate outposts. And along the way, they liberated 700 slaves, including a whole plantation of people who just, you know, as they do it in the movie, and I don't know if this was exactly right, she did sing songs to let people know if it was safe to come. She would vary the tempo and stuff to let them know if they should wait or if they should come. And they'd hear the song, and the way it's dramatized in the movie, this plantation, these people, they hear the song, and they just drop everything and go. So this is the ad that was put into the newspaper by the woman who was the wife of the owner after she ran away. Initially, she ran away with 2 of her brothers, I think, and they turned back. So she wound up going alone. And it says, let's see, where is my... It says here, Minty, aged about 27 years, is of a chestnut color, fine-looking, and about 5 feet high. $100 reward will be given for each of the above-named Negroes if taken out of the state, and $50 each if taken in the state. They must be lodged in Baltimore, Easton, or Cambridge jail in Maryland. So during that 10 years that she was running part of the Underground Railroad, this was out for her reward. In some instances, they thought that she was dead, but that was not the case. She was fearless and fierce in going back again and again. She was fierce about bringing the people with her and that she could do it until nobody questioned her anymore. And so when we ministers gathered in Kelowna last spring, I guess it was, we had, for part of our entertainment, a minister's band. So we had ministers who sang, ministers who played instruments, and Melissa and Z, whom many of you know, Reverend Z and Reverend Melissa Felipe, were there, and they were doing a part of this. And so there is a song that they created called Walk by Faith. And as it happened, one of our other ministers, who I think is in Maryland, in Baltimore, I believe that's where he's his center is located now, Reverend Dr. Raymond Anderson, also signs. And so they performed this for us, and I want you to see it. Jim, yeah, you can dim the lights. So this is Melissa Z. and Raymond, and the backup musicians and singers in the ministries.
True story. When Harriet Tubman first escaped from slavery, she heard a voice that said, "I want you to help free others." Do you know what Harriet Tubman said to that voice? She said, "No." She said, "Not me." She said, "I can't. I can't." But the voice wouldn't let up. It wouldn't let her be. "I want you to help free others. I want you to help free others." Finally, Harriet Tubman, the woman who would be known as Moses, said yes. Yes. Walk by faith, not by sight. Moses walked in the middle of the night. Step by step, she followed a voice. She couldn't shut it off. She didn't have a choice. It told her when to move. It told her when to wait. She was walking in its footsteps. She was walking in its ways. It wasn't just her people Moses led through the night. It was anyone who's ever walked by faith and not by sight. You gotta walk by faith, not by sight. Listening every step of the way. Walk on into the night. Let that northern star be your guiding light. True story. Harriet Tubman, with the help of the Union Army, once freed 750 slaves in one day. Can you imagine 750 people? She liberated an entire plantation. The voice of spirit doesn't mess around. When you listen to that voice, you are never the same. When you listen to that voice, you are free. And it doesn't stop there. You take others with you. The 750 are still alive today. They're your sisters and your brothers in struggle and in pain. They're your doubts and your fears when you say, "I can't," but you can. And you will. When you walk by faith, not by sight. Moses walked in the middle of the night. Step by step, she followed a voice. She couldn't shut it off. She didn't have a choice. It told her when to move. It told her when to wait. She was walking in its footsteps. She was walking in its grace. It wasn't just her people Moses led through the night. It was anyone who's ever walked by faith and not by sight. You gotta walk by faith, not by sight. Listening every step of the way. Walk on into the night. Let that northern star be your guiding light. No matter where your journey started from, there is a voice calling you, yeah, taking you home. You gotta walk by faith, by sight, not by sight. Listening every step of the way. Shut it off. She didn't have a choice. Walk on into the night. Walking in its grace. It wasn't just her song. The night was guiding light and not by sight. Walk on into the night. Let that northern star be your guide. It was anyone who walked by faith and not by sight.
And if you want to hear the song more clearly, You can go online and look for it. It's called Walk by Faith, but you have to specifically put in that it's Z. Egloff and Melissa Felipe, because there are some other songs out there by that name. The power of hearing it with the signing, and especially with Raymond, because when people sign well, it's a dance. They communicate the entire emotional experience of what's being said, as well as just doing the signing. And so I was riveted when they did this, and even though it's not the greatest sound in the world, I really wanted to share it with you because it's so powerful, I think. And the message is the same, the idea that what we're asked to do is to walk by faith. That's the 2020 spiritual vision, to walk by faith, not by appearances, not by sight. It's so easy to judge by appearances, whether it's ourselves or somebody else. It's so easy to think that we're separate when we're looking just from appearances. But when we're looking from spiritual sight, from faith, then we're seeing something entirely different. When one of the people that met Harriet and that knew her on the Underground Railroads, Thomas Garrett, who was also an Underground Railroad agent, he said of her, "I have never met with any person of any color who had more confidence in the voice of God as spoken direct to her soul, and her faith in a supreme power truly was great." Ernest Holmes says, "Knowing that perfect love casts out all fear, we are strong and confident because we know that the law of God goes with us and prepares the way before us." There's a scene in the movie that I understand is accurate where she's got a group of people and they come to a river. And there are hunters with dogs coming. And she starts into the river and they're afraid to go with her. They don't know how deep it is. I don't know if they can swim. And she tries to get them to come, and they're too afraid, so she starts across, holding her gun in the air, and she's praying. And she walks right across the river, and they come after her, just like Moses. She said, in describing her own first journey into Pennsylvania, "When I found I had crossed that line, the border into Pennsylvania, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven." Ernest Holmes says, "Intellectual freedom and religious liberty are necessary to the unfolding soul. Whatever is true is free to all alike. We cannot cover the infinite with a finite blanket. It refuses to be concealed. The universe has no pets and knows no privileged class." I was reading the Gettysburg Address this morning, and we're so familiar with the Gettysburg Address, we don't realize that it was risky what Abraham Lincoln said in that 2 minutes, because it was only 87 years since the founding of the country. 87 years. He said, "407 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." Now, this was during the Civil War. And the battle at Gettysburg, they were there to consecrate this ground where so many thousands of people had died, like more than 20,000 on the Union side, more than 20,000 on the Confederate side. I'm surprised the earth wasn't slippery with people's blood. And so when they went to consecrate this, he wasn't the main speaker. The main speaker was a great orator who spoke for a couple of hours, his memorized speech. But what we remember is this 2-minute speech from Abraham Lincoln. Because during the Civil War, for him to say, with no caveat, all men are created equal, That was a big deal. And it was controversial because he was acknowledging the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. But at the end he said, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here." Well, it was a huge deal, what he said. It was it splashed over all the newspapers. So it definitely was taken note of. We remember it, we've heard of it, it's kind of in the backs of our minds, but we don't necessarily still have an awareness of what an incredibly powerful 2 minutes that was. What he was communicating and the impact of it. And I think that we're called back to that awareness now, that he says we're now engaged in a great civil war, which, and now I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember all of it exactly, but which will test whether this nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long survive. And sometimes it begins to look like our own country might be changing in a way that we might not recognize anymore. Will it survive as that kind of republic? We don't know. And so, as precarious as it was then, it's precarious in a different kind of way now. But if we take it for granted, maybe we're not open to both the teachings of Ernest Holmes and the life of these people who came before us, who sacrificed a lot to give us this kind of life. I know somebody who's planning on not voting, and boy, that's hard for me. I want to kind of try to talk him into it, and I haven't done that. I want to respect his choice, but it's important that we don't take lightly the power that we have. So I'm going to encourage you to vote. Vote in the primaries, vote in the election. Vote your conscience, your heart. Vote. And if you decide that you're not going to, it's important to also be aware that your non-vote is still a vote. It still has impact. I didn't mean to go off on that exactly, but what I do want to go off on is the idea of walking by faith. Walking by faith. Boy, it's not easy to do that. It's much easier to walk by appearances, to walk by sight, to walk by what we can get our hands on, to walk by popular opinion, to walk by what our community agrees on, that we may or may not have in our hearts or conscience as the way for us. But there's only one person who can follow the calling that we have, and that's us. And whether it matches other people's or not is really not the thing. The thing is that we follow our calling, that inner calling, that we have the courage to be the people who have been given this amazing power and awesome responsibility and choice, not only in terms of being members of this land and this culture, but also as individuals who know, as a spiritual community, that that creative law is always active in our lives, and we engage with it consciously or unconsciously. You can't not do it. And so, you know, when Jesus said to the person that where the healing was happening in that family, he said, "Go home, let it be done unto you according to your faith." Wow, that's the whole story right there. There's only one thing limiting the possibilities that we can step forward into, and that's our belief system, our thinking. So when we're willing to step outside of our comfort zone and walk by faith, we're stepping into an alchemically transforming experience. It's a closer walk with Spirit, and it's a closer walk with our authentic selves. That's my belief. And I also think that as praying people, whenever we pray, whatever we think it is we're praying for, whether we need a ride somewhere, or we're worried about our health, or we want a relationship, or whatever it is, there are two things we're actually praying for when we pray that way. We're always praying for, no matter what it looks like, we're always praying for more God. That's the first thing. Because God's all there is, so whatever it is you're praying for, you want more God in that form. And the other thing is, we're praying to be changed. Because if we already were of the consciousness and the embodiment of that which we want, it would be there. So we're praying to be changed in a way that allows the space for that to enter. And boy, that's a big prayer. And so I think we want to be conscious of what we pray about and be willing to have that come with the change that's required so that we can embody it and hold it in our lives. And so I want to invite you, I want to invite me, I want to invite us into the willingness to consider walking by faith more. It doesn't have to be huge. It can start really small. But listening and walking by faith, because every one of us has that guidance. Because when we say that God is present everywhere and it's all there is, it means that that is equally present in every one of us all the time, equally. Nobody's got more God, more of that within their beingness. It's all of it everywhere all the time. So each one of us is holding that right where we are, right now, in this room. And the moment of choice, the point of power, is always now. So what will we choose now? I pray that we walk by faith. Namaste.